information that is just swirling around us in ways that were unimaginable even a decade ago. It's become harder and harder for moderate, reasonable voices to be heard. Think about it. The way you get eyes or ears is to be provocative, even extreme, to say things that are going to draw attention. That'll get you invited back, or that'll get you more, responses to whatever it is you're posting. And I don't think this is a trivial issue, because you hear, as I do all the time, people saying, well, why don't American Muslims speak out? They do. They do. In many different ways. Why aren't they given platforms then for their voices to be heard, at least to counteract the more extreme voices that get an audience anytime they desire? I want to reinforce this fundamental point that was just made. We've got to do a better job, which is one of the reasons why the mayor and I are here, and we have, thankfully, a lot of media here. We want to do a better job using our platform to elevate the voices and the views and the activities of those who are living this every single day. But I would just ask all of us to think how we can do more of that. After this gathering is over and we all go our separate ways, how do we keep lifting up the voices of those who are on the front lines and part of the common defense? And I certainly will look for good ideas about how to do that, and will try to contribute the best I can, but this has to be a conscious effort by every aspect of society so that we do amplify the voices that you were not only describing, but you are a leader of.
Thank you. Jim Featherstone is the president of the Homeland Security Council, a job he's been on for almost a month. But before that, and for many years, he was probably the nation's top local emergency management director, the general manager of our emergency management department, a former chief of our fire department, a man who has had extraordinary partnerships and understands, whether it's riots, shootings, earthquakes, floods, what emergency management is all about. Violent extremism is a focus for this city of making sure that we counteract and intervene before events happen. I think it's one of the pillars of his leadership that he always said that whether it's an earthquake or something man-made, it's how well we also prepare and recover from these incidents. So I want to thank him for his leadership. Open up the microphone for some of his thoughts too. Jim Featherstone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Madam Secretary. It's an honor to be here this morning and speak. From the public safety perspective, I've spent 3 decades working here in Los Angeles, where literally the wolf is at the door every day. Whether it's man-caused or natural, there's always something to be concerned about here. One of the 5 things that we say keeps us awake at night here is violent actors. And whether it's domestic-born or foreign-initiated, the issue of violent actors is a real concern. That being said, our ability to detect, deter, prevent, respond to, and recover from these issues is actually a whole of community and whole of government effort. What you see here in Los Angeles is probably one of the most collaborative big city efforts in terms of the public response, but that public response doesn't stand alone. A cornerstone of the collaborative public response here is an outreach to the whole of community. I was asked recently in my new position, well, what's going to be our effort to the community? And I said, which one? Because, L.A. is the diaspora city. So the various communities here, whether they're communities of faith, communities because of economic stratification, language, ethnicity, et cetera, it's the whole of community that's important here. And having just left the mayor's employ, I know that the public safety effort here is keenly aware of the various communities. For me to dovetail into the work at the HSAC is important too, because the HSAC was spun up like so many other Homeland Security Advisory Councils in the wake of 9/11. The one here is very active. It's very conscious of being able to exercise and leverage the public-private partnership, as well as reaching out to the various communities here in the city. So whether it's, like I said, communities of faith, communities because of economic issues or cultural background or language, 9 of the 10 most vulnerable communities in the county of Los Angeles are in the city of Los Angeles. So it's very important to understand those vulnerabilities, not necessarily vulnerabilities in terms of their ability to respond and recover, but just their vulnerability in terms of perspective. It's such a visible, media-driven society these days. We have to be very, very conscious of the light that's shed upon in the context in which we see the various communities in Los Angeles.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for the practical on-the-ground experience that I know we'll continue to talk about as we continue the conversation. But we go back to a Trojan to round us out here. Bree Lascota is the Executive Director of USC's Center for Religion and Civic Culture, which is as wide-encompassing as it sounds. So why don't you share a little bit about what you do here, and I know you bring a lot of broad experience on these issues together, so when you're looking at both the academic and the practical implications of this thinking, what you'd like to share with us today.
Sure. So about 20 years ago, I started my first day as a USC undergrad. So congratulations to all of you Trojans who are here on a remarkable career. Our center actually started at a very dark moment for Los Angeles, which was the 1992 civil unrest. And it was a professor here at USC, Donald Miller, who was driving over the freeway, the 105 to the 110, and saw the fires in South Los Angeles. And when he got home on TV, he saw Reverend Cecil Murray, who was then the head of First AME Church, who's now at our center here, really channeling the anger of community and calling for peace and calm at the same time. And so our center's roots are really in the ashes of that difficult day for Los Angeles, trying to understand how we build a civic society, how we build a community that respects, honors, and enhances the pluralism that is inherent to America, and looks at community not as a problem to be solved, but as potential to be unlocked. And that's really the cornerstone of our work. Regardless of what community it is, we don't see anyone as particularly suspect. We see everyone that we work with, whether it's in Los Angeles and South LA where we do a lot of work, or I just got back from running a program that started under Secretary Clinton called Generation Change in Morocco, working with young youth leaders who do work in post-conflict societies. No matter who we work with, we see them not as suspects, but as fellow citizens. And that value, that fundamental value of pluralism and of real inclusion makes our work acceptable and transformative for the communities we work in. I was in Uganda last summer, and everyone I was with was worried about being in Uganda because it was about 5 years after the Al-Shabaab attack on the soccer stadium. And the people I was working with in Uganda were people who were survivors from that attack. And when that happened, when I was there, was the Charleston shooting. And so people would say, you're in Uganda, but we have 3 ordained AME pastors in my office. And that was the thing that was heavy on my heart, was the concern and fear of the kind of radicalism that happens across communities and across this country that we're seeing. The scaredest I have ever been was the day after the Oak Creek Temple massacre in Wisconsin. I was in a Langer Hall, which is the Sikh public service where they prepare food and give it away for free, on Robertson Boulevard. And I was working with them to bring them into a collaboration we had when you were running the emergency management department. So they would use their food trucks, this is very Los Angeles, they'd use their food trucks to serve people in the wake of a disaster. And Jim Featherstone's office has done a remarkable job of including community. But 24 hours before, there was a shooting at a temple, and I sat looking at the door wondering, here I am at a place fundamentally about inclusion and service, and I am scared. And I think that that's the reality that many of the communities that we work with deal with, is their concern for their own safety while they're being asked to counter terrorism or counter extremism. And we have to understand that tension, because that tension makes this work more difficult. But there was, I think, someone very near to some of us here who said that there's nothing wrong with America that can't be fixed with something, with what's right with America. And those values of pluralism, inclusion, service, and togetherness, I think, are what Los Angeles really holds for me, and that's what our center works on.
Oh, I really appreciate your approach to this, and the center, from the briefing I received, is truly an inclusive center, looking at so many different aspects of how to create more community resilience, responsiveness, integration, inclusion. And I wanted to mention a conversation I had a few months ago, which ties into the community approach, because I was in Minneapolis. And some of you may know that we have a large Somali American community in Minneapolis. And for a period of time, young Somali Americans were being recruited into al-Shabaab. And this was a total shock to the community. And it was, as we sometimes read now, literally waking up and finding your son gone, and then finding that one of his friends is gone, and then weeks later finding that he's in Somalia, and that maybe hearing that he's been killed. And that was what began the process of the community in Minneapolis coming together and working with a broad range of other institutions, obviously including law enforcement, but also academic institutions, civic groups, and the like. And when I was meeting with these leaders of the Somali American community and the broader Muslim American community in the area, they were very committed to continuing their work to be part of what they viewed as a community response. But they also told me that for the first time, they were scared. It wasn't just the fear that you might lose your child who gets radicalized, because they thought they were coming to grips with that and understanding better how to engage with the young people. In fact, a Somali American young man was just elected to the Minneapolis City Council, first in the country to achieve that kind of elected office. So they were feeling very much part of the broad-based response that we are hoping to engender. But then they started hearing a lot of the rhetoric in the political campaign that we are in the midst of. And one father said to me, he said, "I've never been afraid to be in America." That, you know, there are problems like there are in every country, but now my children are worried about going to school. They're worried that they will be called names. They're worried that they will be bullied. They're worried that they will be labeled something they are not. And it goes to your experience, Bree, being in the organization with Sikhs, who, as we know, have been subjected to hate crimes and violence because of their distinctive appearance in many instances. And so how do we counter what are the messages of negativity, of exclusion, of discrimination, in a way that can be heard and accepted, so that we can, not be deterred or detoured from this work of community building? And maybe if you could respond, and then Salam, if you could.
It's a great question. It's the $64,000 question. I think there are a few things that we've learned along the way. One is, it's not just what you do, it's how you do it. So we can have the best frameworks on paper, we can have the best intentions, but if we don't have this whole of government approach, where on one side the government is reaching out with an open hand, and another side, the perception and sometimes the reality is that community experiences the iron fist of government. That makes it an incredibly difficult conundrum for people who want to be included to be part of the solution. The amplification issue is always a problem. In Los Angeles, we have during Ramadan an amazing organization called the ILM Foundation,